Hey, I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and in this video, we're going to create aspect ratios in HTML and CSS. Now, if you don't know what an aspect ratio is, it's just a ratio between an object's height and width. So for example, a common aspect ratio for a television is 16:9. An aspect ratio for a square is 1:1 because the width and height are the same, and a common aspect ratio for a book cover is 1.4:1. Now we're going to create all three of those examples in this video, and I'm going to create a card that's a 1:1 aspect ratio that also has a 16:9 aspect ratio for a video thumbnail. So let's go ahead and get started here, and what we're going to be using in this tutorial is CodeSandbox.io. Now, CodeSandbox.io is an online code editor, and I use this just because we don't have to set up development, and it's really easy to share and update the code. So once you go ahead and sign up for CodeSandbox.io, what you want to do is come down and click on New Sandbox. I'm going to click here on Static, and this is under my recently used. So it's either going to be here under your official templates, and if you still don't see it, just come up here and type in Static, and then click here on the first example. Now what this is going to do is create us a new static template. Now you should see that this is in the drafts, and if you want to change the title of this project, you can go ahead and click here and just change it, but I'm just going to keep it at the default. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and get rid of this H1, and just go ahead and just change this title here to something that's a little more descriptive. So aspect ratios with HTML and CSS. And we're going to be using a Google font in this project. So I'm going to go to fonts.google.com. And the font we're going to be using is Poppin. So I'm going to just type that in here. Click here. We want to select this font here. Come over to Embed. And we want to copy this code right here. Come back into our project. And at the bottom, beneath our title, I'll just go ahead and paste that in here. And what that's going to do is import that Google font so we can then use it in our CSS. And the next thing I want to do is I want to create a file here in the source of our project called styles.css. Then back into our HTML in the head tag, I want to go ahead and import this using a link tag. So link, that's going to be style sheet, and then the where that style sheet is. So href equals and styles.css, and we need to go make sure we close off this tag properly. And there you go. So that's everything we need to do in the head of our project. The rest of it we're going to be doing right here. So let's go ahead now and just get rid of this H1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a main tag here, which I'm going to call grid. Now you could just write it like this, like main class equals grid. You could do that if you wanted, but things like VS Code and Code Sandbox come with a tool called Emmet pre-installed, and Emmet is just going to make your life easier writing HTML and CSS really fast. So the way we can do this instead is to write main, a period for the name of the class, and we can give this a class called grid, and then just hit enter, and there we go. Now we have exactly what we're looking to create. All right, so we can go ahead and create the next section here, which is going to be the square examples. Now I'm going to be creating a section here with a class called max width, and I want to have some children within this section tag. So the way we can do this in Emmet is with an arrow like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a div with a class called square. Now you could write div, but instead it's interpreted if you just do the class name that it's going to be just defaulted to a div. So we'll go to do square. And what we want to do is we want to do that 4 times. So we're creating 4 divs with the class of square, and hit enter. And there we go. So we just saved ourselves some time here writing that HTML. All right, so now I'm going to come below this and essentially do something very similar. So section, max width. This time we're going to create some children with the divs of a class called video. And again, I'm going to do that 4 times. Again, I'm going to do this same thing. So section, max width. This time it's going to have a class called books, and remember we want to do this 4 times, so we can do times 4, and there we go. All right, so the last one is a little bit different because we're creating cards, and the cards are going to have even things nested within them. So the emit code here is going to be a little bit different. So what we want to do instead here is do the same thing for section max width. Then we want to do our child symbol here. So we're telling it to create a child. Then we're going to create a child called video card. So this is going to be a div with a class called video card. And this is going to have children as well. So the first one is going to be another div called video thumbnail. And we can add more children within this video card by doing a plus. So instead of an arrow, which would add children to it, we're just adding another child to the video card. So by doing plus, I can say, hey, I want a paragraph tag, and this is going to have a class called video title. And then what we can do is we can actually go ahead and insert some default copy on this paragraph tag using curly brackets. So curly brackets, this is a title, and we want to create 4 of these. So we'll just go ahead and do times 4 and then hit enter. And now you can see that we have our section here with a class of max width. We have 4 video cards. Each video card has a div with a video thumbnail class, as well as a video title with default, this is a title text. Now that's everything that we're going to do for this example. So let's go ahead and save this HTML project. And now we can see our HTML, and obviously things aren't styled. So that's why we're going to jump over to our styles.css and start getting this all brought together with styling. So the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and set some resets here. Now the asterisk means apply this to everything. And what I like to do is I like to set margin and padding both to 0, so it overrides the default values, and also make sure box sizing is set to border box. Now I've covered in other videos what box sizing is, and I'll be sure to link that below if you want to check that out. So let's go to do margin 0, padding 0, and box sizing is border box. All right. Next up, I'm going to set some HTML elements. So we're going to be using rem here, which is a relative unit of measurement, and it's relative to the root object. So if you go back to our HTML, you can see our root object here is this HTML tag. So what we can do is we can add a default font size here of 16 pixels. And 1 rem is going to be equal to 16 pixels. And then we can just, if we want 32 pixels spacing, we do 2 rem. So this is really good because, one, if someone has like accessibility needs and needs to change or increase the font size, they can go into their browser and change that, and your website is just going to scale proportionally. And it's also really handy for on smaller screens. If you just want to shrink the overall size of your site and you're using rems, you can just do that in a media query and take care of that really easily, which we're actually going to be doing later in the video as well. So the last thing we want to do here is set a font family, and we're going to be using the one that we imported. So Poppins. And the fallback here is going to be the default sans serif font for the browser. All right, so that's everything for the HTML. Let's go ahead now and style our grid tag. So that's going to be grid. We're going to do display, and instead of block, we're going to do grid. And we're going to set some grid template columns. Now, you could type grid template columns, but an even faster way is just go grid template columns and then tab, and then it's going to fill that out for you. Now, if you don't if you never used CSS Grid, it can be a little intimidating at first, but it's actually really easy. And all we're doing here is we're defining some grids columns for our layout. So we're going to be using as the first value, a value called 1FR, which is a fraction unit. Now this is really cool because let's say, for instance, you wanted 3 columns of equal sizes. What you could do is this 1FR, 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 and now you have a grid with 3 equal columns. Now let's say, for instance, you wanted the middle column to be twice as big. What you could do is 2FR. Now the one in the middle is twice as big as the 2 on the left and the right. So it just gives you an example of how to use 1FR here and kind of what it means. It just breaks things up proportionally But what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be creating 12 columns in the center and then one on each side, which is just going to scale to whatever space is still available. So what we can do here is we're going to use another function called repeat. And why we're doing this is because we're just creating a number of these values, so we can use 12 instead of writing them out 12 times. So we'll say 12. And what we want to do here, again, is use another function called min max. Now, as you could possibly guess, what this does is it sets a minimum value for a column width and then a maximum value for a column width. And the reason I like to do this is because it's a really cool way to essentially just set a max width on your content in the center, and then you have those two 1FRs on each side, which are just going to scale up. So if you have a huge, massive wide screen, your content's not going to scale beyond 1440 pixels. So the minimum we want is just auto. So just go ahead and figure that out for us. And the max is going to be 4.2 rem units. So let's go ahead and just save that. You can see some things have changed here. And let's go ahead and just open this into a new project, inspect this, and then come down and just check it out. So you can see how those two units on the side, these 1FRs, you can see that on the left and the right. And then you can see those 12 columns in the center. Now we still have to add some gap or some spacing in these columns. So let's go ahead and come back to our code here. And beneath this, we can add some gap. So you can add some top gap. So in between each grid, how much do we want? We just want 2 rems. And in between each column, we want 2 rems as well. Now, quick question, and just make sure you understand what rem units are. So we set the font size up here to 16 pixels and the gap to 2 rems. So what should the gap be? Well, it should be 32, right? So 16 times 2. So just as a refresh to make sure you understand how rem units work. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is margin. I'm going to set a margin here for 2 rem on the top and the bottom and 0 for the left and the side. So let's go ahead and just save that. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and style that max width div or section that I used throughout this HTML. So if you come back here, you can see that we use this on each of these section tags. So let's come back here. And here we want to tell it how much space it should take up. So grid column is what we're going to be using. So again, we can just do GC for grid column and then tab. So just save ourselves some typing. And what we want to do is we want it to start on the second column, because remember that first column is that one that just spans. We want this to only take up the max width, so the 12 columns in the center. So it's going to start on the second column. Then we do a slash and we want it to span across the given remainder of those 12, which is the max width. So let's go ahead and save that. We're also going to be using grid within this grid. So again, we can go ahead and say, hey, we want to use max grid on this max width. So we have to first define grid. And then what we want to do is set grid template columns. We're going to use repeat. And what we're going to do is we're going to repeat this 12 times. And we're just going to copy this min max. So this is essentially all we're doing, is copying this and saying, hey, create 12 more columns of the same size of the grid that is the parent. All right, so save that. I'm going to copy this gap because we're going to use the same gap as well. And we'll go ahead and save that. So now let's come back into this and refresh it. And if we come into this now you can see how this is chopped up a little bit differently. We can see that things are starting to come together. Now things look a little weird because we haven't told these things where to go on the grid. So let's come back here and start to just continue doing this process. So the first thing we want to do is we want to style these squares. So let's do square. Again, remember these squares are within this max width. So we have to tell it how much using grid column that it should take up. So again, we'll come in and say GC for grid column. And this is going to, actually, we're not going to use grid column, we're going to use grid column end. Now, if you come back here to look at grid column, you have other properties that we're essentially setting here. This is grid column start and grid column end. Now, I needed to specifically say where this should start because here we don't really need to, because I'm just saying, hey, start on whatever's available. And what we need to actually define is how much space it should take up. So how much space it should span across. So in this case, grid column in is going to be span 3. Let's go ahead and set a background color here so we can actually see the square. So background color, and we'll just do something like light salmon. So here is where the magic happens with setting our aspect ratios. And what we do is we set a padding top, and we calculate it based off of the ratio and then multiply it by 100. So we'll set padding top. We'll say calc. We want to calculate 1 divided by 1 because that's the aspect ratio for a square. And then we want to multiply that by 100%. Now, if you know math, that's just 100%, but I'm using this calc just so it's very clear what that ratio is. And if we save that, we can now see the 4 squares at the top. Perfect. So that's exactly what we're going for. And you can see if we come into this and refresh this, and just to prove that this is a perfect square, we can come in, hover over it, and you can see that the size is 265 pixels by 265 pixels. And you might be wondering, hey, is this responsive? No, it's not quite yet. We're going to take care of that later in the video in media queries. So be sure to check that out if you're curious on how to make this responsive. All right, so now we can go ahead and move on to the next thing. So let's just copy this here because essentially we're going to be writing something very similar. We want this, instead of say square, we want it to be the video. We want this to span 3 as well. And let's go ahead and just change this to light blue. And in this case, we want a aspect ratio of 9:16. So remember, a video is wider, right? So the height is smaller than the width, and that's 9:16. Now you might hear someone say 16:9. You need to flip those around. It's height and width, at least in this case. So now if we save that, you can see the videos are showing up. Perfect. So let's go ahead and just move on to the book. So again, just copy this. Let's move down here. We'll say book. Let's change this to light green. And this is a little different. So in this case, the book is taller. So the width, or excuse me, the height is taller. So the first value should actually be bigger. So 1.4, and this value should be 1. So if we save that, we can now see the books coming in. Perfect. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to style the video cards. Now remember, I said the video cards are going to be these squares with a video, a thumbnail in the middle, and some text. So let's go ahead and just style the video cards for now. So video card. Again, we're going to use grid column end, span 3. Background color, so BC, just to make this a little faster, is going to be a light pink. Padding top is going to be the calc again, and it's going to be 1 by 1 because we want it to be a square times 100%. All right, so if we save that, we should go ahead and just see those cards there, which we do. But there's one more thing we want to set here, and that's position relative. Now, the reason we're using position relative is because on the video thumbnail and the text, we're going to be using absolute positioning, but we need to tell CSS what those need to be relative to. So in this case, it's going to be relative to this video card parent. So once we do that, we can go ahead and save it. And we can go ahead and now and move down to the video thumbnail. So let's go ahead and do video thumbnail. We'll set a width here of 100%, so just take up whatever is available. We'll go ahead and set a background color, and we'll do light gray. So this is just, it's going to be an image, but we also want it to not show anything if there's not an image loaded. We don't want it to be the light gray. So this is just kind of like a default color. So we'll set that, and let's go ahead and set the padding top as well. So padding top, again, we'll do calc 9 divided by 16 multiplied by 100%. And we need to make sure we do the semicolon, save that. And there you go. Now you can see that this is down here. Now things don't look right because we still have some more CSS to write. And the next is to set that position absolute that we just spoke about. So that's going to be position absolute. We need to say where it needs to be. So on the top, we want it to be flush to the top. If we want the left, we want it flush to the left. So to do that, it's just 0 and 0 on both of those properties. So if we save that, you can see now things are looking like they should. We have this thumbnail at the top of this little square card, and it's sitting at the top, and our card is still a 1-to-1 ratio, and our thumbnail is a 16:9 or 9:16. Now we also are going to have this to have images, so we need to set some more background properties here. So one of those is going to be background position. So again, just practice making this faster. So BP for background position, and that's going to be center. Now what we want to do is set a background size. So background size looks like here, click this, and that's going to be cover. So we want it to fill the space. And we don't want the image to repeat. So we can do background, repeat, no repeat. Let's go ahead and save that. And now right now we're not seeing any images because we're not, we haven't imported and set those images yet. But for now, let's go ahead and handle the title here before we set those images. So in order to style the title, that's going to be on the video title class. Font size here is going to be 1 rem. The width here is going to be 90. So let's go ahead and just set the position here as well. Position, absolute. Save that. Okay, so you can see that this padding top is essentially what it's doing is it's pushing it down, and then it's now going to be flush outside of what this padding top is for the card. So the way we're going to handle that is we're going to set the top and left values. So let's go ahead and set the top here, and let's think about where we want this card or this title to be. We want it to be underneath this thumbnail. So how can we handle that? Well, we know that this is 9:16 divided by, or 9:16 times 100. That's how far down this is. So what we can do is we can say, hey, for this paragraph, go ahead and push it down 9:16 times 100. Again, a little confused there saying this myself. And then just add 5 more percent. So it's going to push it a little bit beyond that thumbnail. So let's go ahead and write this out. I think it'll be a little bit more easier to see once we write it out. So 9 divided by 16 times 100. Again, that's going to push it down to flush with the thumbnail. So let's just go ahead and just prove that by setting that here and saving this. And we also need to set a left here. So left is 5%. So this is going to give us a little bit spacing from the sides. And the issue here is that I don't have 100%. I just have 100. So it doesn't really make any sense here. So if I save that, you can see now that it's flush to the thumbnail. So it's pushed down just below that thumbnail. So to add to that, we can just add plus 5%. So if we save that, you can see that it pushes it down 5% past that thumbnail. We also set left to 5%. So it gives us a little bit of spacing here. And we also have the width 90%. Now, the reason I did that is 90% width of 5, that's going to give us 100%. So left and right is 5, width is 90, so that takes up the full space. So let's just go in here and check that out so it's a little bit more clear. Come in here and inspect that. So you can see how the space on the left and the right is 5% as well as on the top. All right, so now that we have that, we can go ahead and move on and add these images here. Now, I got the images just from a website called unsplash.com. I just found a website that I liked, for instance, or a picture that I liked, right-clicked, open image in new tab. You'll see at the top here that it sets a width as well as a quality. So I like to set this something to, this image is pretty small, so let's find a different example. They're usually a lot bigger, so let's do open image in new tab. So this one's 500 as well. So let's say, for instance, you set it to 1200 quality, you can set it to 60. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you the size that you want. Then you just right click, save image as, and then just save it to your computer. Now, I also ran it through a program called Image Opt-in. So if you just go ahead and Google this, Image Opt-in, it's this one right here, and you can download it for the web, and it also has a web service, so you can drop your images on there and it will help compress them so they're smaller files. So what I'm going to do, come back to my project here, I'm going to create a new folder and then just go ahead and import these images. So we'll do images, and here you can see this little icon with the upload files. Let's click this. I'm just going to go ahead and import these 4 images. Okay, so now that we have that, we can go ahead and use this and set those images in our CSS. So what we're going to do is we want to target each individual card. And the way we can do that is using the nth child selector in CSS. So video card, the one we want to select is the first one, so nth child 1. And what we want to do is we want to set a value on the video thumbnail of this card. So that's going to be video thumbnail. Then we can set a background image to a URL. That URL is going to be on our local machine here and our images, and then we'll do pure.jpg. So if we save that, now you can see that JPEG image coming here on the first card's thumbnail. So let's just go ahead and copy this, paste it 4 times here, changing this value to 2, 3, and 4. And again, I'm going to change these here to fall, peak, and beach. So these are just the names of the images, just in case that wasn't clear. And now if we save that, you can see all those images are coming in. So that's perfect. All right, so now what we can do is we can focus on making this responsive. Essentially, we did exactly what we want, but if we come in and refresh this, you can see on smaller screens, things aren't looking that great. So let's go ahead and fix that here with some media queries. So let's come back into our code here, and let's go and do @media. And this is going to be on screens. And what we want to do here is once the max width hits this value, so once it hits and is below this, we want to set some new changes. So that's going to be max width 65 rem. What we want to do here is change the grid. So what we want to do here is change the grid template column. So grid template columns. We want to make the sizes on those a little bit bigger on the left and right. So 2 rem. And here we're just going to tell CSS Grid to create 6 columns, and we're going to pass in that fraction unit. So we're going to say, hey, create 6 equal size columns and figure out the size for me. Don't let me have to think about it. And on the sides here, we'll just do 2 rem again. All right, so next we want to set a gap. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, so 1 rem. And set a margin here of 1 rem as well. Okay, and I think I should be able to just set, because these are equal, I should just be able to set this to 1 rem like that. And let's go ahead and come up here and look for the gap. I think I don't have to pass it in twice. I might be mistaken, but if it's following other patterns of CSS, it should be the case. So let's see, 2 rem, 2 rem, 1 rem. Just going to save that. Make sure nothing broke. Okay, everything still looks fine. Okay, so we set the margin here on the grid, and that's going to be on screens once they hit 65 rem, and that's everything for that. So let's go ahead now and set the max width. So max width is going to break because remember, it's right now being set to set 12 columns that don't exist. So we need to fix that. So what we want to do here is do grid column, and it's going to start on 2 and then span the 6 columns that we just created. And we also need to create columns in here as well. So that's going to be grid template columns. And we're just going to do the repeat. So we're just repeating the 6 that is in the parent. Okay. So now that we have that, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the video title sizes. So let's do video title. And let's just make it a little bigger. So font size 1.25 rem. Okay, so now if we save that and refresh, it should change at a breakpoint. Let's see here. So it changed right there. So you can see that it changed. We come down, title's a little bigger, and you can see that things are taking up different spots. So remember that we set that to span 3. So now that there's 6 columns, it's essentially just taking up half the space. So the cards are getting a little bigger as well. All right, so now that we have that media query done, we can go ahead and move on to the next one, which is at a breakpoint of 50 rem. So that's only screen and max width. It's going to be at 50 rem. And now we can go ahead and add our styles here. So grid, make sure we put a period before that. It's going to be grid template column is going to be 1 rem. So the margins here are just going to be a little smaller. That's all we're doing. And then again, we're just going to have 6 equal size columns. So 6, 1 FR, and then 1 rem here. So that's everything on the grid. Let's go ahead and style the next thing here, which is going to be our max width. And here we're just going to make it a little smaller as well on the gap. So max width, if I can spell this, it's going to be gap 1 rem, and there we go. So it's going to do that. Okay, so now we have one more media query to write, and that's at max width of 40 rem. So at media, only screen. This is going to be, again, like I said, 40 rem. And we're going to have all of these take up the full space. So we need to tell it to have grid column grid column in should span 6 to fill out those 6 columns in the middle. So we can say that on the square, on the video, on the book, and on the video card. We want to say grid column end span 6. Okay. And last but not least, let's just make that title a little bit bigger, because now that the card's bigger, the title should be bigger too. So video title, font size 1.5 rem. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and be sure to check out our guides and full tutorials on skillthrive.com, as well as our YouTube channel. Again, I'm Hunter from Skillthrive, and I'll see you in the next video.